The topic of the second session is the United States, China, and the Korean Peninsula. But I'm not a scholar, so I don't know how we could characterize in terms of theory. But if I reorganize the theme in a more comfortable way, it should be Korean Peninsula in light of the U.S.-China relationship. So within that context, I'd like to proceed 1.5 hours discussion. Before we start our discussion, I want to place one or two basic point which we should keep in mind. That is the characteristic time framework from now on till 2018, mid-2018. Ironically, this year, U.S. will have some presidential election. So next year, Korea will have some presidential election. So based on the past precedent of the composition of the government, I don't expect the coherent alignment or the policy coordination between United States and Korea is impossible till the summer of 2018. That is great, very unique, and very unfortunate situation. So how we could tide over such kind of very characteristic time framework 2 years from now on. So in the meantime, China, North Korea will use every tactics as they did, successfully did in the past 2.5 decade. For example, they will make some strenuous and tireless effort to increase three main targets. First, how far they could hit the missile, ICBM. The second, how to successfully refine the miniaturization process of the warhead. And third, how they could develop re-entry, re-entry skill. So, in case of the third case, they should demonstrate that they possessed re-entry skill, especially the test should be conducted in the very huge, wide ocean area, which is very hard, very difficult for me to believe for North Korea to show up in that situation in a more objective way. But anyway, they will make some, sometimes they will talk, they will pretend to go to the negotiation table. Sometimes they will enjoy hibernation, as they did in the past. So, so that's why I personally think we should develop more frequent, interactive track 2 discussion like today's, Trilateral Dialogue. With this kind of thing in mind, I'd like to introduce three distinguished, speakers. Maybe I don't, dwell on great fame, the two, the great scholars from the United States and China. But I would be remiss if I do forget introducing Dr. Chong-jae Ho, who is a professor in Seoul National University. Also, he is a director for program of China and U.S. relationship at the university. Maybe he is a rising star in Korean academic society among between the two giants from U.S. and China. So maybe to have more focused discussion, I will give some guidelines. Maybe you don't have to limit it to that, questions. First question is convergence and divergence in the policies of US, China, Korea, and Japan vis-a-vis North Korea. Second, evaluating Chinese policy toward North Korea and its impact on US-China relations and ROK-China relations. Third, the concrete ways to secure stabilization of the Korean Peninsula situation. And fourth, the potential for managing the emerging security dilemma on the peninsula in light of the diverging long-term interest. But last question, I need more frank discussion on these issues. If we fail, or if our every effort fails in managing North Korea from now on to a couple years to come, one of the possible mounting idea might be going nuclear, as you know, President Trump mentioned, and some of, as far as I know,
President, yeah.
and some Korean think tank has some very interesting poll. If my memory is correct, around 60% of the people supported going nuclear, even in Korea. But the polling system is the result of polling is quite different from time to time, from situation to situation. But how we could? My question is, in that case, how we could prevent a chain reaction of going nuclear in Northeast Asia. Okay, I should make a first stop here. I want to invite Doc.
Well, thank you very much for coming out today, ladies and gentlemen and excellencies. And thank you very much to KFAS and President Park for organizing this very responsible and interesting conference. Thank you for coming out on a beautiful day and showing your interest in this subject. Today we have the challenge of analyzing the divergent interests of the various parties engaged in the North Korean security scene. Our organizers have urged us to assess the potential for managing the emerging security dilemma and for preventing a nuclear chain reaction in the region. Before focusing on the Korean Peninsula, I'd like to take a few steps back briefly to put this set of issues in a context. First, the global security setting is trending toward fragmentation and instability. I can cite Russia or the Middle East. Asia is still relatively stable and prosperous, but the US and China are groping for a formula on how to accommodate China's rise while retaining the region's sources of stability. China's transition to a new normal of economic growth and the fate of the Trans-Pacific Partnership are still uncertain. Second, there are at least 3 emerging security dilemmas between China and the US and China's neighbors. In the South China Sea, as mentioned before, the stimulus and response cycle of your so-called defense measures are offensive against me, so I must take my own defensive steps against you. And this is at a well-developed stage at this point with Secretary of Defense Carter in the Philippines today. Though the material stakes are seemingly minuscule, islets and shoals, the competition is becoming a proxy for a much larger competition. In the Taiwan Strait, we are about to see a new era of uncertainty with a latent security dilemma compounded by a huge gap in strength between Taipei and Beijing and implied security assurances from Washington for Taipei. Here on the Korean Peninsula, we are entering an incipient new cycle of the security dilemma. It should not be surprising that Pyongyang's demonstrations of new threats are leading democratic Seoul and Washington to look to protect their people, possibly through deployment of THAAD missile defense systems. Beijing also, unsurprisingly, sees that possibility as diminishing its deterrence and therefore its defense capability. Third, in this broader context, The Chinese and American leaders have repeatedly stated their willingness to accommodate the interests of each other and to avoid having our acknowledged and serious differences over these and other regional issues lead to a big power conflict. Now, if what I've just said is a correct characterization of the overall situation, we appear to be heading into an extended period of a kind of twilight zone of proxy contestation between the US and China in Asia, including here in Northeast Asia. Leaders thus far appear to be willing to compartmentalize each of these areas of emerging security dilemmas. At the end of the last session, there was some talk about mixing Taiwan and other issues. Though unofficial commentators in China might do so, so far, responsible officials are not offering trade-offs such as help me with Taiwan and I'll be together with you on North Korea, or how can we be tough with Pyongyang when you challenge our claims in the South China Sea. This apparent restraint, in my experience, probably reflects a realization that doing so will only make each problem tougher to wrestle with. But we should not forget completely that dealing with discrete regional issues nonetheless implies effects on the underlying big power competition for influence. Now, we have just witnessed an extraordinary episode in China's relations with North Korea. After a prolonged cooling off period following the execution of Jang Sung-taek, Beijing and Pyongyang appeared headed for a rapprochement of sorts last fall. Politburo Standing Committee member Liu Yunshan attended anniversary commemorations standing next to Kim Jong-un, and Kim exhibited restraint in those public remarks and activities on issues sensitive to China, such as missile launches and nuclear weapons, so long as Liu was there. This led many in China to conclude that Kim was more rational in behavior, secure in his authority, and prepared to meet Beijing halfway. By early December, knowledgeable Chinese anticipated a possible visit by Kim to Beijing before or after the upcoming Workers' Party Congress. But just as quickly as a new normal in relations between Pyongyang and Beijing appeared to be coming into the scene, it disappeared in disagreements that at first seemed superficial. The contents of a North Korean girl band's performance in Beijing, and then became deadly serious with Kim's announcement and subsequent testing of a claimed H-bomb capability, followed by the UN-proscribed satellite launch. Beijing, to me, at first seemed to be in shock over this sudden switch in the signals. There was detectable displeasure at hurried remarks by Secretary of State John Kerry about the failure of China's approach to the North, followed by an extraordinary effort by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi to pressurize his counterpart here in Seoul. Xi Jinping did not avail himself of the hotline to President Park, despite her government's indication of a desire to communicate directly. The Chinese permanent representative to the UN seemed uninstructed for weeks about how to shape Resolution 2270 of the Security Council, laying forth the new sanctions to respond to the North's provocations. It is difficult for me to assess what the internal deliberation process was going on in Beijing during the gap between the nuclear test and subsequent Chinese cooperation on Resolution 2270. Was it a feature of the way Xi Jinping has taken personal responsibility for so much of China's foreign policy? Was it the ambiguity of China's new foreign policy making process? Was it something else? In any event, it appears that some combination of factors suddenly ended Beijing's initial period of shock at the provocations of Kim Jong-un. I do not know whether it was President Obama's call to Xi on February 5 to urge cooperation on the resolution, as some American officials believe, or it was China's reaction to the insulting treatment given to Special Negotiator on North Korea, Ambassador Wu Dawei, after he returned to Beijing on February 4th. Whatever the explanation, the period that started with sending Liu Yunshan to Pyongyang had ended and a new phase begun. Early signs of enhanced Chinese enforcement of the newly authorized sanction lead to hopes in Seoul and Washington that Beijing may be closer to resolving the security dilemma it has long faced regarding North Korea. That is, whether to put denuclearization and its threats to Chinese security interests first, or to continue to nurture regime stability in the North. When Xi and Obama met on March 31st, the Chinese leader reinforced his message of seriousness about implementing the sanctions to which Beijing had agreed, but he quickly reverted to classic and familiar points about stability on the Korean Peninsula. From this episode and the preceding Jang Sung-taek experience, one is forced to conclude that an underlying entente among the US, Korea, and China about how to deal existentially with North Korea and reunification is going to remain elusive. This should not be terribly surprising. Geography dictates that China and North Korea, despite their many frictions and animosities, will still be neighbors long after the nuclear issue is resolved one way or another. Beijing has little prospect for close alliances with its many neighbors, and thus is accustomed to managing its interests in less than satisfactory situations. China's relative and absolute power are growing. Those of the US and its allies are perceived to be in relative decline. This combination of considerations presumably disposes Beijing to believe that time is on its side. Resolution of the future of the Korean Peninsula therefore would be premature. China's terms can only improve through delay. This leads me to the near to medium-term conclusion, barring major and unexpected changes in China itself, that foreign and security policy challenges regarding the Korean Peninsula are going to be matters of management and not solutions. Implicit in China's agreement to Resolution 2270 and to its conditional enforcement is that the military capabilities the North is acquiring are not in China's interest, but not yet of an existential nature for China. This suggests that Beijing perceives Pyongyang to be difficult and headed in the wrong direction, but there is still room for China to exercise its influence positively on Kim's long-term behavior. So, now we confront the reemergence of a security dilemma on the Korean Peninsula among the very parties who are meant to cooperate in reducing the North's threat to regional stability. In my view, it was inevitable that the leaders of two democracies, the Republic of Korea and the United States, have no choice but to explore the possibility of deploying missile defenses to protect their populations from the new threats. How could they do otherwise? It is no secret that Beijing has put tremendous pressure on Seoul not to deploy THAAD. There are implicit threats that deployment will cost Korea in its relations with China. And China's state control system gives it a wide array of tools with which to express displeasure, economic, political, and otherwise. So one question is how to mitigate the Chinese reaction. President Obama conveyed to Chairman Xi that the US has neither the intent nor THAAD the capability to damage China's security interests on the peninsula. He offered to send a team of specialists to explain the technical capabilities of the system. And there is an opportunity to do so in June in Beijing at the planned Strategic Security Dialogue and Strategic Economic Dialogue. Given the extensive misinformation in the Chinese media and underlying distrust, this will not be just one-time effort to try to persuade Beijing. Seoul has a role to play, of course. Since the cessation of the Korean War, Seoul has never envisioned the US alliance as more than primarily defensive against the threat from the North. Even as the Republic of Korea has enlarged its horizons for security cooperation with the US and others, it has not been my experience that an ROK leader would find his or her interest in developing a capability to use against China directly. This frames the potential for a sort of negative security assurance that Seoul's leader can offer Beijing. Again, this will require a diplomatically persistent effort to convey the message. There are voices in Japan and Korea who question long-standing rejection of nuclear weapons capabilities in light of the growing threat from North Korea. So many believe that until Beijing sees that the region may go nuclear in response to the North, it will not be adequately motivated to protect its own interest in preventing such proliferation. For me, I understand the frustration with self-restraint and also the tactical utility of alerting Beijing to the danger of not being more firm with Pyongyang. But I suspect, unfortunately, that the Chinese, as I do, will conclude this is more a bluff than a real security option for Tokyo and Seoul. States that lack strategic depth and live in dense environments are, in my view, significantly better off relying on the American security umbrella than developing their own capabilities. Their energy would be better rewarded by managing their relationship with Washington in light of the emerging threat. And Washington has an obligation to demonstrate that it's managing its capability to project the umbrella despite the manifest challenges at home and abroad. There are many other points to discuss in this session this afternoon, and the chairman has given us the challenge to do so, but I'll leave it at this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doc. Now, I'd like to invite Professor 연saro는 from Tsinghua University.
Thank you, Ambassador Park, and for this very valuable opportunity to share my view with the friends and the guests and the experts about the security situation at the Korean Peninsula. And actually, now this session, we are discussing about China-US relationship and with the impact on this regional security. And one thing I think we should remember or keep in mind, and there are some many problems and conflicts between China and the US. And the North Korean nuclear weapon is just one of them. And if there's not 1,000, at least there are 100 problems between China and the US. So this issue is just one of the hundreds. And currently, I think that if you look at the international media, and they have more interest to report the conflicts between China and the US in South China Sea, rather than talking about the North Korea's nuclear weapons. And if you go to the country beyond the Korean Peninsula, you can hardly hear people talking about North Korea's nuclear weapon, but not here. Well, what I want to say, I want to say China and the US have to handle about all of these problems between these two countries, and sometimes adopt a bilateral approach, and sometimes multilateral approach. North Korea's nuclear issue is related with at least 4 countries, and North Korea, South Korea, China, and the US. So this inevitably, we need to solve the problem or manage this problem, handle this problem by multilateral approach rather than the bilateral. So what I mean that the cooperation between China and the US on North Korea's nuclear weapons is limited. I do not mean the cooperation is limited. I mean the impact of the cooperation is limited. And if this cooperation is very effective, we already denuclearized North Korea. Well, since the end of the Cold War, and the North Korean nuclear weapon is a 4-party game. And then, I don't know why, and Japan and Russia becomes a player into this issue. Actually, the 6-party talk and did not solve the problem. But by the end of the 6-party talk, North Korea possessed nuclear capability. After the end of the 6-party talk, and North Korea continued to improve its nuclear capability. Now this is a challenge to us. And what approach we should adopt to solve the problem? And by now, it seems to me, and the UN consider that, okay, let us set up, impose more rigorous economic sanction on North Korea. Whether this approach effective, can achieve the goal we expected, I don't know. But from my understanding, now those people who strongly advocated for economic sanction on North Korea becomes hesitate to argue the economic sanction is very effective. So now, just now we heard that people are already talking about what we can do if we failed. That means that people's confidence in economic sanction is not increased, but declined. Why? Why there's a more sanction on North Korea makes those people believe in economic sanction have less confidence in this approach? Well, from my understanding, that this is a kind of, the North Korea's nuclear issue is a security issue. And you cannot rely on economic methods to solve the security problem. Well, now China and US have become really more and more cooperative on this issue. And does this cooperation can help this issue? I'm not so sure. And before, most people believe China has more influence on North Korea. And why? Because China adopts a totally different policy from the United States. And the US cannot have influence on North Korea, and because the US policy is different from China. Now China's policy is shifting toward the similarity, like the United States. So what does it mean? The implication is that China's impact on North Korea will decline. It's not will continue decline. Already declined, it's going to continue decline. And so there's still some difference, not that huge, between China and the US on this issue. So China's impact on North Korea is still a little bit different, or a little bit more impact on North Korea than the US. When someday China adopts exactly same policy like the US, that means we will have the exactly same impact like the US. And if US have zero, maybe we also have zero impact. So do the cooperation help us to solve the problem? I think it's a help for prevent the war. That's true. The cooperation between China and the US on the North Korea's nuclear program do help to prevent war from occurring in this region. But it doesn't mean that it will help us stabilize the situation. My personal prediction is that the situation will become worse and worse. The tension will become serious and more serious, rather than it becomes more tense rather than less. But then everyone develops more confidence in that there's no war, there's no danger of war. So that's the situation already happened. And for this region, since the end of the Cold War, and there's a lot of tensions in East Asia, but this region is so peaceful. There's no any real war since 1991. And we have a more peaceful region than the Europe. European experienced the war in Kosovo, the war in Georgia, the war in the Ukraine. But in this region, we are so lucky. We have tension, but no war. So that means the cooperation between China and the US will continue to consolidate the situation and prevent war from occurring, but then the tension will continue to grow. Okay, last I want to say, what will happen in visible future? Let's talking about 5 or 10 years. we cannot know what will happen in 1,000 years, 100 years, or even 20 years. Just within next 10 years, the relation, since this issue related with the 4 parties, and China, US, and South Korea, North Korea, let's look at the relationship between the US and North Korea. I don't think the relationship between US and North Korea will have some fundamental change in next 5 or 10 years. So that means no matter China cooperated with the US or not, and US relationship with North Korea will be the same. And how about the US relationship with South Korea? I don't think there will be a dramatic change. And China cooperate with the US or do not cooperate with the US on the issue, and the US and the South Korea's ally will be maintained the same. Certainly, just now, Ambassador Park raised the question, how about this scenario? South Korea will go to the nuclear weapon by itself. Well, I doubt South Korea will make that decision, because all policy makers have to make the judgment which approach is more beneficial to the South Korea, to have a US nuclear umbrella or to have its own nuclear capability. The trade-off is very clear. So that's why when Trump argued that he preferred to let Japan to have their own nuclear weapons, and the US stopped providing the nuclear umbrella, and then the response from the Abe administration very clear. He said, no, we won't. I don't think your government will do different decision than the Abe administration on this specific issue. Okay, because this is so obvious, and you possess nuclear weapons and use it to get rid of American nuclear umbrella, except increase the cost, you don't get any more security protection to yourself. Then, how about the relationship between China and the South Korea? No matter we cooperate with the US or not, and China and the South Korea relationship mainly decided by South Korea's policy toward China. As long as the South Korea and keep a distance from the US on South China's issue, on the arms sale to Taiwan's issue, on the Diaoyu Islands problem from Japan, I think China and South Korea can improve the relationship. But if your government make a decision, okay, we totally side with the US, we support all of US military containment against China, then China and the South Korea's relationship will go down. Well, how about your relationship with North Korea? I think it's also very, very sure the relationship will getting worse and worse rather than getting better. And we know some people think, and we really dislike that regime. We want to set economic sanction on them. Well, that's understandable. But the question is that you set more sanction on that, can you make the North Korea back to the negotiation table? I doubt. And the South Korea already withdraw from the six-party talk. And why, and what's the purpose for them to rejoin the multilateral dialogue? Well, they heard that they secretly contacted with the US, try to have a bilateral discussion. I don't think North Korea will join any multilateral dialogue about this issue. They will prefer the strategy of a bilateral approach rather than multilateral, because they don't think the multilateral will be fair to them. No matter how many countries join this country, anyhow, all of you said one side, they're isolated as one party. So what's the purpose for them to join this multilateral discussion? And finally, is China's relationship with the US. No matter we cooperate with the US or not on the North Korea's nuclear issues, and that won't help to solve our problem on the other issues. US policy is very clear. There's no linkage between the cooperation on the North Korea's nuclear issues with the Taiwan issue, South China Sea issue, renminbi's exchange rate issue, and the Chinese investment in the, no any linkage. So from my understanding, the no linkage policy will continue at the American side. So that means the cooperation on this issue and do not have a substantial impact on China and the US relationship on the other issues. And so China and the US relationship, whether it's improved or declined, actually mainly influenced by the other issues rather than this issue. Finally, is our relationship with North Korea. I think it's also very quite sure our relationship with North Korea is declining. And it's very, very difficult to resume. And as long as we carry out the sanction, I don't think we can resume our relationship with North Korea. And if someone asks a question, if they are going to have a more nuclear test and the missile launch, what China can do? And I don't know. And one thing is clear. And if we add more sanction, then we will make the relationship even worse. If we do not join the more sanction, it's also no hope to improve our relationship. And so generally speaking, the relationship it's already become very difficult to improve China and North Korea's relationship. Okay, finally, let me write up. What will happen? I think now the situation becomes quite clear. And the danger of the war is not increasing. North Korea has already have 4 nuclear tests. What's the difference if they have 5, 6, and 10, 11, 12? I don't think they make the situation totally different. And if the neighbors can tolerate 4 nuclear tests, my understanding, the neighbors will tolerate more. So just more discussion, more sanction, and many things that we have done before, and then but nothing will change. Second, and the tension will increase because this situation make North Korea will becomes hopeless. They don't have any hope to see the situation change. So what do they do? I think they will do whatever they think benefit to them rather than to benefit the stability of this region. The less stable, in some way, is in favor of their policy. So for me, and North Korea will make the situation worse rather than to getting it better. And finally, I will say, and today is a very good concern. It's a very try to see whether we can find the other kind of multilateral dialogue to replace the role of the 6-party talk. I don't know. But anyhow, the experienced 6-party talk tell us, and bring the Japan and the Russian in, do not help very much. So they join us or do not, and it seems to me no one care, right? So now we try whether we can 4-party, 3-party, and anyhow, they seem to me 5 and 6 are same. So we are looking for 3 or 4-party dialogues. Thank you. I don't know whether it's achieved that. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you for your very candid, insightful, ideas, and some suggestions on to replace, 6-party talk even. But now it's high time for me to invite Professor Chung on behalf of the Korean side.
Thank you, Ambassador Park. Most of us take a scene like this for granted, but 5-6 years ago, putting together panelists from the US, China, and South Korea in one place on North Korean issue was very difficult. So I think there has been a big step made, and I would like to commend KFAS and Ambassador Park for setting up a meeting like this, which is very important at this particular time and point. I think basically North Korea has made it very clear that getting nuclear weapons and not giving them up is their goal. And thinking otherwise at this point is probably anachronistic. And I do not think anyone in the audience would think that way. So in that respect, I think sanctions, particularly encapsulated in the UNSCR 2270, are very useful. However, I think as I read through the resolution, I thought there were some loopholes. And given the fact that there are loopholes, And here we'll already talk about dialogues or parallel talks. I think that's somewhat not helpful in actually achieving the goal of denuclearization, because stopping halfway with the sanctions will not really help. I think not only South Korea, but also many countries, including the US, tend to have a sort of inclination to underestimate North Korea's nuclear weapons and missile technologies in the past years, as well as to underestimate the resilience of the North Korean regime. I think that has been what we have been doing in the last 20-some years. But as Ambassador Park has summarized very well, North Korea's nuclear capabilities and missile technologies now are completely different from 10 years, not to speak of 20 years ago. So I think it really depends on how durable and consistent our application of sanctions would be. I think we need a lot more than 6 months. I think we need at least a year. But whether that can be sustained in the real setting, that remains a real question. Another issue concerns US-China relations, because how far is the United States willing to go in implementing the secondary boycott? In other words, in dealing with Chinese corporations which engage in illicit businesses with North Korean companies that were listed on the UNSCR 2270. A lot of people compare the North Korean case with the Iranian case. The total trade volume of North Korea is only 1/10 of Iran. And North Korea doesn't really have the institutionalized market per se. That means North Korea is much less vulnerable to the sanctions that we are now applying against North Korea. And North Korea is very familiar and used to the so-called arduous march. They are really well adapted to difficult times. So it would be too optimistic for us to come up with a conclusion that sanctions will work. If we go back 3 years ago, in 2013, right after the third nuclear test by North Korea, there were sanctions, there were some measures implemented by China, including the suspension of bank accounts, Chinese bank accounts used by North Korean companies. And there were a lot of media reports which were actually flooding. But in retrospect, they were not really useful. So we need to be very sober about the effectiveness of these sanctions. That means not only South Korea, but also the countries involved need Plan B, Plan C. And rather than thinking too prematurely about having these parallel talks. Another thing is, what if sanctions actually work after 6 months or a year, and North Korea comes out to the table, negotiation table? Then we are already, again confronted with a familiar dilemma. How can we rely on their sincerity this time? How can we actually validate it? Because unlike 5 years, 10 years ago, they might have some larger number of places where they have been conducting this experiments, tests, and whatever you have. Fundamentally, I think internal cohesion of the concerned parties is the most important. I think that is a view that's shared by many concerned parties on this issue. In that respect, I think US-China cooperation is really important. As the power gap between the US and China narrows down, I think my own view is that US-China relations are being transformed from a sort of cooperation-based competition toward a competition-based cooperation, which is only going to be a selective cooperation. And I think I have two working hypotheses. In other words, if a policy at hand is geographically further away from Asia, there is a high likelihood of cooperation between Washington and Beijing, because China considers Asia as its backyard as well as a traditional sphere of influence. The other hypothesis, if the policy at hand has a less component of hard security, the likelihood of cooperation between Washington and Beijing is higher. then what about North Korea? North Korea is right in the middle of East Asia, and North Korean issue is a hot security issue. Therefore, achieving US-China cooperation is going to be very difficult. So it provides us a very good litmus test as to whether the G2 can really come up with a cooperative package to make real contributions to the international community. Now let me get down to the concrete question as to the divergences of the US and China on the North Korean issue. I think there are many divergences. Of course, there are some convergences, but there are many divergences. First one, who is to blame for the failure of the six-party talks or the efforts of resolving this issue for the last 25 years? China blames US blames China. I think both are to blame. China is responsible for benign neglect for the last 20 years. I think US is partly responsible for strategic patience, which I still do not quite understand what it really means. Second, I think China's view of nuclear weapons development and missile technologies is a bit different from the US. US is much more concerned about non-proliferation of technologies and weapons. But China, on the basis of its own experiences of the 50s and 60s, tends to consider nuclear weapons development and missile technologies as belonging to a sort of sovereign realm of a sovereign country, particularly with regard to missile technologies. And threat perception of North Korea is quite different. I mean, China perceives North Korea not to be that threatening, despite the fact that it borders on North Korea, which is developing nuclear weapons. And usual answer that you get from Chinese experts is that you already have Russia, India, Pakistan, which have nuclear weapons. So having another one on its border would have very little or lower marginal threat perception. US, of course, is very different. It doesn't have any nuclear weapon states along its borders. And also, I think in terms of empathy toward the so-called legitimate security concerns that North Korea has toward the United States, I think this is also based on a very different experience of China, because China perceived the US as a threat in the 50s and 60s. So I think they can more easily sympathize with North Korea as far as the US as a security threat is concerned. And also US and China differ quite a bit on the utility and the legitimacy of the unilateral sanctions other than multilateral sanctions from the United Nations. There is also a very big difference between the US and China on the question of pursuing a regime change in North Korea. So there are many differences. If I may add one more, China's 3-no policy is no nukes, no war, no stability. But America's unofficial 3 no's are no more nukes, no better nukes, no proliferation. So there's not much of an overlap, although a lot of people think there is a much overlap. And I wonder what South Korea's no policy is about this nuclear issue. Now let me talk a little bit about China's policy toward North Korea. I think this is the most controversial and debatable issue in the last couple of years. As I mentioned earlier, after the third nuclear test in 2013, many Korean news media, not just Korean though, but many Korean news media flooded with reports saying that China's policy on North Korea has really changed. I was very doubtful. I think today we heard Professor Lee Jae-tong's remarks on that. That I think confirms what I have been talking about. However, I think in tactical terms there have been some changes. I'm not quite sure whether these tactical changes will in the long run be transformed into strategic changes in China's policy toward North Korea. But I think China is, first of all, unhappy about North Korea doing these nuclear tests on its border. Particularly after the third test in 2013, there were many reports, including some internal reports in China, that are concerned about radiation effects in the northeast provinces. I think this has created certain incentive for China to be more louder on this North Korean nuclear issue. And China is not happy about brazen North Korea. North Korea doesn't listen to China. Think about the fact that North Korea launched long-range missiles on the day the representative Wu Dawei visited Pyongyang. So I think this was really a slap in the face. And given the fact that China really cares about the face, Mianzi, I think it was really a serious issue for Beijing. However, the cooperation and friendship treaty between Beijing and Pyongyang is still intact. And China's view of North Korea as a buffer, I think, still remains. So with those issues still in place, it is difficult for me to think that there will be a strategic change in China's policy toward North Korea, although I admit there have been tactical adjustments in China's dealing with North Korea. Finally, how do you actually secure stability on the Korean Peninsula situation? It all depends on how you define stability. Do you equate stability with the status quo, or are you referring to a piecemeal changes without military conflict? But I think, as the situation suggests us, both options will become increasingly more difficult to come up with a really effective resolution of the issue. First of all, I think on this particular issue, United States and China tend to be independent variables. And South Korea has, as I mentioned, US, China have these no policies, whether it's a 3 or 4, but I'm not quite sure what South Korea's specific framework is, except for we are opposed to nukes in North Korea. So whether or not the South Korea can become and partly independent variable in this very complex situation, that is going to be very important. And down the road, if there is no resolution with regard to North Korea's nuclear weapons program, then I think there will be a accumulated frustrations and helplessness perceived by Korean people, which is not going to be a very good news. And also, it's not going to be very good news for the US-Korea alliance as well, because thus far, only one dimension of the US-Korea alliance has been highlighted, that is a security guarantor and provision of defense for South Korea. But any alliance has another dimension, which is a double containment. That means US may be perceived as constraining South Korea's option, because US and China can be perceived as countries which are more interested in management rather than resolution, while South Korea is more interested in resolution. I'll stop there. Thank you.
I will give some few questions, but in the meantime, if there's anybody who want raise any questions, please pass it to our staff, so that I could easily cluster, the questions. I hope it might be as succinct as possible. My question, to both, Professor Yen and Doc, is that both of you, in accordance with your, description, the U.S.-China relationship are suffering from another replica of the another Cold War. So maybe yes, there are many confrontational area, but as third parties, the situation gets much a little improved. One of the distinct, clear-cut, example is the U.S.-China cooperation in climate change negotiation. During the Copenhagen, the COP15, climate summit, it failed because, the U.S. and China distrust each other. So at that time, the prisoner's dilemmas rule was applied. It's a very typical case, I believe. But 6 years later, in France, U.S. and China work as co-locomotive to have international community have legally binding international agreement. So it's great work, as a result of the coordination between two powers. So one of my assessment on even the South China Sea issues, I think the confrontational feature is a little exaggerated, because as long as the United States is exercise absolute predominant naval powers around the world, I think maybe 20 or 30 years later, I don't know, but for the decade to come, there might be, the problem should be management. How reduce the confrontational, the possibilities. So, for example, in case of China side, the clarification of 9-day lines, or the future of the arbitrational, the court decision between China and Philippines will be good gestures, toward some coming up. Toward making some general rules, to govern in the ocean area. So that is my impression is that there's many that kind of the dilemma is a little more a little exaggerated. That is my initial comment, but I want to respond both of you. On the Korean Peninsula issues, to Doc, the North Korea, recently North Korea implied, to our surprise, that North Korea will exercise the first nuclear strike. That is almost officially implied. So the Russian side made immediate, immediate warnings against, that kind of implication. So why, even during the Wu Dawei's visit to China, the Wu Dawei mentioned that, it is reported that during his stay in North Korea, North Korean side emphasized again and again, North Korea will not use nuclear, they will not make any first strike. But I don't know what happened, what changed during the couple months or weeks time. So how we could deal with such kind of new threatening, by exercising first nuclear strike. So that is my questions to Doc and Professor Yan. You emphasize that the Chinese influence on North Korea is declining. So in that case, maybe yes, maybe not. But from my point of view, I got some impression that China is enjoying the sense of complacency. After 2009, the foreign affairs leading group of Communist Party decision. I mean, 中央外事工作领导小组2009. At that time, till that time, Chinese pillar position toward North Korean was summarized in two things. One is maintenance of the peace and security of Korean Peninsula. And second pillar is denuclearization of Korean Peninsula whole. But it is understanding, it's my understanding that during that important meetings, they discussed what if these two pillars conflict each other. So it is our general understanding that that at that time, Chinese government put priorities, maintaining peace and security, over denuclearization. So maybe that kind of decision, I'm not sure, I don't know, I have no way to confirm that decision, whether this is true or not. But if it is true that North Korea, China already gave such impression that, as long as peace and security is maintained, China will overlook any denuclearization process. So now I think now it's high time for a Chinese party or government to make a clear message. No. Denuclearization is our priority. So we changed our mind. So maybe I think China should send such kind of signal. So maybe on top of the application of very massive sanction. So maybe I want to get your response to that question. And third, to Professor Chung, you made some very interesting assessment on the role of the strategic patience by current U.S. government during several years. You have some, I got some impression that you have some reservation on the validity of such, the U.S. strategic patience. So can you elaborate why, do you have such kind of observation? And if we have some hindsight, what should be done, to improve, to utilize the last several years in terms of tactical approaches? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Park. To take your very specific question to me first on the issue of first use of nuclear weapons or first strike capability, I think it's too early to say what the intention of Kim Jong-un or his people is at this time. I'm certainly no veteran of the Korean War remaining in the upper circles of the KWP or the SDC can believe that engaging in conflict will leave Korea any better off than it was, North Korea, any better off than it was at the end of Korean War, when there was barely a brick upon a brick in the North. And a nuclear war will be even worse. So one has to assume this is firing for effect, making some broad statements to try to leverage this very small but growing nuclear capability into something more, whether it's security or economic benefit or just influence for the North. It may just be an irrational departure for the moment, or maybe something more sinister. If I may address the broader questions that you raised, I think that the three of us on the panel today, and I'm very pleased to be among these gentlemen, we were all describing, like three blind men describing an elephant, but I think we were all describing pretty much the same elephant, which is a China that's not going to be going very far to be helpful, that we're going to have to work hard to persuade to do things that will help to sustain the stability on the peninsula and to restrain the capacity to express that instability both on the peninsula and farther afield. The U.S. and China basis for cooperation under the climate change agreement, that was a substantial agreement. It was done mostly for the reasons of each state in its own way, but it does have consequences for the globe, and that should not be dismissed. But I think in the hunger for cooperation, there's been an overselling of the results of that as implying a much broader range of areas of cooperation between the U.S. and China, and I would not want to extend the implications of this agreement beyond reality. And then on the South China Sea, as you mentioned, I share your view that the tension there has been exaggerated. We've tended to turn to rhetoric and media exploitation when we didn't really have an alternative way to check this Chinese sub-military pursuit of its interests in the region. They don't quite go far enough to provoke us or our friends to military action and response, but they come very close. And I think in frustration with that process, we've turned to the nearest microphone rather than to more substantial means to respond to what China's doing. I believe I'm seeing some adjustment in the U.S. posture on this, but it's going to take some time to make a more qualified judgment on it. Thank you.
I like the question about the cooperation between China and the U.S. on the issue of the climate change at the Paris. And actually, many people in China and the U.S. argue that, and this cooperation is based on mutual trust. Actually, from my understanding, I don't think this cooperation has anything to do with the mutual trust. And there's no mutual trust between China and the U.S. And the all cooperation based on our shared interests. No matter we have the trust or not, as long as we have shared interests, then we have a cooperation. And I have a coughing, and so in China, especially in Beijing, everyone hate that, and you cannot breathe freely, and and you get coughing every day. Certainly, we need to, and we have to clean our air, so reduce the CO2. In the U.S., the same thing. They maybe their pollution a little bit better than us, but then the people also complain about they need a green energy. So in this way, I think we have both domestic interests overlap. So we developed the cooperation on the climate change. And concerning the question about about South China Sea, I think this competition between China and the U.S. over the South China Sea is quite peaceful. And by now, there's no military clash. There's no fair exchange. And I think very peaceful. Both sides already developed an approach and called under the name of transparency. And the transparency strategy make both sides can effectively manage the competition and make them peacefully compete against each other. And the typical case is that when Americans sent their warship to China, and 10 days ago they released the news on the newspaper, and then they say, okay, this report has already sent to the White House, and then next they say the president is already reading the report. The day after they say, okay, president signed this report, and then they said, okay, this report sent to the Pacific Command. And then 2 days later, the Pacific Command said, okay, we are going to send our warship within 3 days. And then next day, they tell the world that, okay, the ship is shipping, that tomorrow they will go there. And then when the ship get there, everyone knows it. So, okay, we know your ship is coming. Okay, then China, okay, we protest. So now this it becomes very, very interesting. Both sides use this strategy. Transparency do not surprise the other side. So the competition is very stable. So from my understanding, the peaceful competition is inevitable. And I don't know, I do not argue it's good, but at least it's not that harmful, not that dangerous. And so the competition between China and the US is much better, much more peaceful than the competition between US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And I think if we can maintain the competition between these two countries like that, we should feel satisfied with it. Yeah. And the third question about the North Korea's preemptive strike. Well, by now, and except this nuclear bomb in 1945, and all of these countries adopted a preemptive strategy and never implement that strategy. And U.S. insist on preemptive strike, but they never did it. And except China, by now no nuclear powers and promise no preemptive strike. China is the only country and promise that we only do the second strike. So, but now we firmly believe those countries who insist on preemptive strike, dare not to strike first. So the nuclear weapon is so different. And anyone launch a nuclear weapon, from my understanding, also means the end of the day of their own country. So talking about what's the priority for Chinese government for maintaining peace in this region or the denuclearization. From my understanding, maintaining peace is not China's first priority. It's also first priority of the South Korea and the US. And if not your first priority, I just wonder why in the last 20 years, your government so hesitated to launch a war. Why? I can understand. You're so desperate to denuclearize North Korea, but no one talking about, okay, let's go to war tomorrow. So obviously, because you gave the first priority to peace, so you do not want to use the denuclearization to break up the peace. So it's not China gave the priority to the peace. Everyone. So no different. So here, and I found that toward the China, people's view about China's policy towards North Korea is really very interesting. Just now, Professor Zheng argued that, and he don't think China's policy toward North Korea changed substantially. This is so familiar because our propaganda ministry, every day they say that, no, our policy toward North Korea South Korea never changed. Our policy toward the South Korea is the same. So here we hear people that hold the same view like our propaganda ministry. So from my understanding, whether China adjusted its policy toward North Korea, that is object of facts. It's not based on the people's interpretation. So finally, I will say, and China in this region, and we really face a new situation. Is that every country have to reconsidering how to deal with the situation when North Korea will continue move on its on the path of nuclear program without stop. And we just continue to talk another 24 years, or we're really looking for a solution. That's the serious issue.
Is it? Okay. I think this question about strategic patience, better to be answered by Doug, but since the question was posed to me, I'll try to answer it. I guess I'm not the only one who has been critical of this strategic patience concept, because my friends and colleagues in Washington, D.C. used to tell me there was barely no policy, and that was basically what it means. But I think the mainstay of that particular concept is that basically Americans did not trust North Koreans. So if that were true, then now if sanctions really work well, North Korea comes out to the negotiation table, Americans will have exactly the same dilemma. How can you trust them now? Given the fact that they might have diversified the sources and sites of all those tests in the past couple of years, where is the basis of trust, judging trust then? So and another question is, which is an interesting one. I'm not quite sure how many people can actually subscribe to this view, but after the third test, Americans were not that active in dealing with this particular issue. But after the fourth test, Americans became more active in dealing with the issue. Why this suddenly heightened degree of activism on the part of Washington, D.C.? I think this is a very interesting question for us to explore. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I got some questions. So the first question is that North Korea profits from trade and aid with, DPRK, North Korea profits from trade and aid with China equals more than 50% of North Korea's 6 billion military budget. So China should reduce trade and aid. So there's the first question. I'm not sure, the statistics is right or not. But if I add just one thing, maybe in case of the coal, the import amount of coal from North Korea is around $1 billion as of 2014. Out of 7.4 total import. So, but the Security Council Resolution 2270 for the first time have some sanctional, the measures on the import of coals, even though there are some qualification languages. So that's why now we are paying much attention, how it will work. So maybe, Professor Yan, you give some rough idea. Or you will respond later or now?
I can do it later.
Okay, later, okay. The second question is that the same, addressed to Professor Yan. So popular. So the essence of the North Korean nuclear dilemma is coming from the fact that North Korea do not perceive China as the real threat. They just think, China as an empty threat. So that's why, China should apply more dialect and very vigorous, involvement to have North Korea feel that China is a real, in a sense, the threat or real, game changers. So that is my second question. And then third question is, it's very, very general and popular question, but just you don't have to be so serious. But I'd like to raise these questions, to pick up your some general ideas. The question is that like this: in this situation, the U.S. and China really want reunification of Korea. That is the question. Thank you. Yeah, to both of you.
Well, let me before responding to these questions you've just raised, speak to the issue of strategic patience. I've heard the phrase used many times. I've never heard it used officially. I'm not sure that the strategic patience has any official standing. And I would offer as a counter to the proposition that it was officially the U.S. position, that shortly after Mr. Obama entered office, he reached out to Iran and North Korea and other states. His reward for reaching out to North Korea was the third nuclear test. And then by my count, there were 5 other public and not so public efforts to try to start a new basis of communication. In each one, South Korea was wholly participating in the consultations leading up to it. And in each case, there was a response that was negative. Invitations for the North Korean negotiator to come to New York, and we had the Cheonan incident. Invitation again for him to come to New York and start talks, and we had the Yeonbyung-do shelling. And it goes on and on right down to very recent times with the February 29 agreement that didn't last a month in 2011, I believe, maybe 2012. This has not been a patient program, but it's an exhausted program. How do you go to the relevant people in the government and say, I want to try again to get insulted by North Korea by opening a new round of secret or not so secret talks? So I think that's one part of what constitutes this perception there's been strategic patience. The second part is an estimation of North Korea's ability to take its incipient launch and weaponization capabilities and then industrialize them to the point where they're a threat to the U.S. And there's a lot of skepticism at how far that can go beyond token weapons, which are important, but you don't mount a broad national strategy against an enemy who's could be compared, I don't know, some of the young people here probably don't know what I'm going to talk about, but olders may remember the movie The Mouse That Roared with Peter Sellers. If you don't remember it, look it up on your computer. But it was a little Grand Duchy in Europe wanted to be defeated by the United States to get the benefit of American aid after being defeated. So they sent their soldiers over to steal a secret weapon from an American lab, and they succeeded in doing it and took it back by a tugboat to Europe to try to threaten the U.S. with this one bomb. I think a lot about North Korea is captured in that film. I recommend it to you for some Saturday night if there's nothing better on television. And then, the additional question was? I think there's no doubt the United States has been in favor of unification. And someone earlier talked about U.S. restraint and failure to press for militarily when we've had crises with North Korea. The American government's been very conscious of the fact that there's 17,000 artillery pieces north of Seoul that could rain devastation down on the population of this city and elsewhere. And therefore, it would be, well, short of crazy, or maybe crazy, to think that we can maybe target a surgical strike on a launch capability or a weapons capability and not have horrendous consequences for our friends in South Korea. That doesn't diminish the fact that the U.S. still stands consistently behind efforts to reunify if they can be found, if a way to reunify can be found that will be, in first priority, a peaceful way.
I think I have two questions. One is about the trade between China and North Korea, and the second is about the China's North Korea do not feel the threat from China. And first, and from my understanding, both China and North Korea keep the number of the trade volume between these two countries a secret. I doubt anyone knows how much. And so this kind of data, generally speaking, from my understanding, based on the imagination rather than on serious research. Just like when the North Korea, we know North Korea possibly to conduct a nuclear test, people say, no, North Korea dare not. Why? They said they don't have enough the nuclear material. At most, they have two, for two bombs. If they have a test and fail, so they cannot do the second, because if they do second test, there's no material left, so they're meaningless. So at that time, people based on the imagination that North Korea has a limited nuclear material for developing nuclear weapons. Now they already have 5. So now those experts and who estimate North Korea has a very limited nuclear materials disappear. And that means, from my understanding, the people provide this kind of data. They never take any responsibility for it. And they just say it, and then they forget it. So for me, it's very difficult to make comments on this kind of data. The second about North Korea do not feel China is a threat. That's true. I think that's why China suggests the North Korea's motivation for nuclear weapon is not because of China. It's because of the threat from the South Korea and the US. So now the reason for North Korea to go to nuclear program is because US and South Korea rather than China. So I think now we are talking about how to denuclearize that rather than how to make North Korea to improve their nuclear capability. So if China can pose you add a threat to North Korea, that means you make North Korea more determined to go to nuclear weapons, right? So from my understanding, we should understand what's the goal. The goal is to denuclear nuclear, or you want to not make North Korea more determined to improve their nuclear capability. So in that way, I think China's policy is reasonable and don't become the threat to the North Korea. And whether the South Korea and the US want to reduce your threat to North Korea, that's your policy. From my understanding, the more you increase your threat to North Korea, they will become more determinative to have their nuclear program. And the final thing is that, and I understand that because your relationship with North Korea is not that friendly. Even we can tell from the title of this conference, the handling dealing with the North Korea is not a policy toward the North Korea. So the dealing with obviously is not a friendly term. So actually, I think it's understandable. You hope all of the countries become the enemy of North Korea. That's we're in favor of your interests. But then you also have to concern, and why every country want to be the enemy of North Korea. Just like if every country wants South Korea, hey, you should be enemy of my enemy. Can you do that? That's very difficult.
So, maybe, Sebastian, do you want to make some comment on
Unification?
unification? Yes.
Well, this question seems to me is irrelevant at this moment. And the relationship between North Korea and South Korea becomes so intense. And the opportunity for peaceful unification becomes slighter and slighter. And there's, from my understanding, the only available, or maybe the available approach is to unite the two countries through war. Meanwhile, I doubt either of you want to go to the war. If the South Korea and North Korea do not want to go to war, meanwhile, you continue making the relationship getting worse and worse. How can you unite it with each other? I don't know.
Thanks so much. Maybe the question is, the answers to the old questions which raised by myself and like Minister Yoon is not an easy one. So we cannot expect some outspoken, immediate answers overnight. But what I could say as of now is that we hope China and the United States will be more cooperative in dealing with North Korean nuclear issues. From whatever motive, as you mentioned, from necessity or kind of the mutual trust. So on top of that, I'm very proud that we could have this kind of very interactive trilateral talk. So I promise all of you to continue this kind of session whenever we need and we think appropriate. If I just give some final say on why we use the word engaging, with my North Korean cousins, it's unavoidable as long as they remain as serious violators of the UN security regulations and the WMD orders. So I hope someday will come soon, when we should change the words into other words. Thank you so much. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.